Yes. Good afternoon, I should say. Namaskara. So I'm Daniel Gheno. Thanks to my accent, you already know I'm French. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of the energy management business of Schneider Electric. The energy management business is representing 31 billion euros of revenue among the 38 of the company. I'm fortunate to have celebrated last week my 30th anniversary at Schneider. And I'm even more fortunate to have been working in all our business, industrial automation, low voltage, medium voltage, on 3 countries. France, of course, Japan, and I had the privilege to spend 4 years with you in India when I was driving the Global Technology Center here in Whitefield. So that's great pleasure and bit of emotion to be with you today, especially to speak in India about the future of electricity, the future of energy. So let me share with you our vision and what it means in terms, first of all, of urgency, then in terms of disruption and technology. So let me start by 5 global trends which are reshaping our world. Let me start by 5 global trends which are reshaping our world and created unlimited opportunities of growth for technology. The first one is climate change, of course, with, let's keep it in mind, half of the Earth's population living in areas exposed to climate-related risks. I'll come back to this. The second one is new global equilibrium, which is a post-COVID topic, which is a lot about supply chain resilience, with about 80% of the global supply chain leaders, the Fortune 500 companies, explaining that they have a double source scenario now between most of the time Asia, Greater Asia, and Europe. Number 3, digital transformation. Of course, we continue speaking of the continuous increase of the number of connected objects, multiplied by 6 in 10 years. But I think it's even more important to keep in mind, especially if we speak of energy, the amazing deployment of artificial intelligence. It took 7 years to the World Wide Web to reach 100 million users. It took 2 months to ChatGPT. And that's creating a revolution for all of us in the world of innovation and technology. Number 4, energy transition. No better place than India to speak about this. Energy transition is about access to energy. Energy transition is about finding solutions to support and sustain the growth, typically in your country, while decreasing the dependency on fossil fuels. Number 5, last but not least, I should say, evolution of wealth. By 2050, we will have to welcome 2 billion more people on Earth, of which 1.5 in India, Middle East, Africa. And these people will need buildings, infrastructure, transportation. In one word, they will need access to energy. Okay, so where do we stand today? Today we are at an inflection point. On one hand, we are in the middle of an energy crisis, at least for economic reasons, typically in Europe. I'll give you an example. But also because of this access to energy story. By 2050, we will need to give access to energy to 3 billion people. The 2 new billion people I was speaking about, plus, we can debate on figures, but the more or less 1 billion people not having access to energy today. On the other hand, the climate crisis is not a discussion anymore. It's a fact. Every day, we are facing everywhere in the world, and I think that's the important point which probably started in 23. Everywhere in the world, we are facing extreme weather events, flooding, heavy rains, heat waves, fires. You know, good news being that that's probably waking up everywhere in the world people about the emergency of the topic. So we are at this inflection point where there is an energy crisis and there is a climate crisis. And that's a bit unfortunate to say it this way maybe, but what if both were catalysts for what we need to do in terms of energy transition? So if you step back on the energy crisis, it's a fact. The energy price has been regularly facing stiff increase, crisis. We probably had about a dozen since the first oil shock in 1973. This chart is representing the price of natural gas in Europe over the past 3 decades. Of course, you can see an acceleration of the volatility in the past 10 years, which is, of course, related to the situation in Ukraine. That's massively impacting consumers. That's also impacting governments. Overall, the European governments have been spending 900 billion euros to support the consumers, to mitigate this volatility as much as they could. If you step back now on the climate crisis, I'm afraid I have to spoil the atmosphere. We have to acknowledge that the CO2 concentration in our atmosphere has been rising exponentially over the past 150 years or so. Of course, it has been reaching the highest level in the history of mankind. And you all know that the consequence of this is an increase of the Earth's temperature that we politely call global warming. Okay? But you see the figure. We could go up to 4, 6 degrees. Well, the experts are explaining us that if we don't act, I think being in 2025, maybe the message should be, if we don't act fast enough, this curve will have dramatic consequences on the conditions of life on Earth. I'll give you 2 examples. In the worst case, the sea level could rise up to 20 meters. In the worst case, the occurrence of extreme weather events, which are already massively disrupting every country, could be multiplied by 40. That would clearly be unaffordable. So you may remember that at the COP21 in Paris in 2018, there was a kind of agreement that would be acceptable to remain within plus 1.5 degree of temperature rise by the end of the century. And the important point that I'm going to tell you about today is that would mean that we are carbon neutral overall in 2050. And of course, some countries, including India, will be probably a bit delayed because of your growth, because of the cycle, you didn't reach yet the peak like the European country. But overall, that would be carbon neutral. Today, the current commitments, and unfortunately, we all know that commitments are just commitments. And by the way, just a breaking news, commitments don't decarbonize anything. But the current commitments are putting us on a trajectory between plus 2.5 and plus 3.5. The most pessimistic experts are even saying that the plus 1.5 will be reached in 2030. You know, sometimes people are telling me, yeah, okay, 2.5, 1.5, you know, I'm speaking a lot to engineers, that's explaining the discussion. Yeah, 2.5, 1.5, it's only 1 degree. Mm-hmm. So let's assume plus 2.5 instead of plus 1.5. That would mean plus 1 meter for the sea level, 1 billion people impacted. 1 meter, 1 billion people impacted. That would mean that 1/3 of the biodiversity on Earth would be destroyed. 1 degree above 1.5. So, of course, don't take me wrong, this carbon neutrality goal in 2050 must remain a goal. But it's far too far. You know, I'm sure all of us have done or are doing projects. I just would like you to imagine that you are doing a project only caring about the finish line. You know, we are in a race, for the moment, where the more we run forward, the more the finish line is moving off. No way. So what we have been saying for now 5 years at Schneider Electric, and I cannot be glad, but I was going to say I'm glad to say that now the IPCC, the experts group, is saying the same, but I should not be glad about this, that we need to accelerate. We need to divide by 2. In fact, you know, and again, speaking probably to a lot of engineers, the more the curve is going up, the more it will be difficult to flatten it. Okay, that's physics. So we need to divide by 2 the CO2 emission by 2030. There is only one problem. That's moving 3 times faster than we are today. So my first message for you all today, and again, without jeopardizing the growth, my first message is the sense of urgency. And I'd like to share with you a data point. There is a guy called Claude Lorius. He's a French. He's probably the greatest French glaciologist. He passed away 2 years back. He's a guy who spent his life in Antarctica, you know, drilling holes and studying the ice. This guy wrote in the famous paper, you know, Nature, he wrote, the human activities on Earth are triggering a climate change. You have any idea of when it was? It was in 1987. I was young and handsome. 1987. And we are in 2025 debating about should we do 1987. So sense of urgency. Now, I'm telling you all this, but probably some of you are wondering why this guy working in energy domain is speaking about all this. Well, we all know that this climate crisis is generated by the greenhouse gas emissions. It happens that these greenhouse gas, you know them, the methane, the F-gas, you need to keep in mind that 74% of these emissions are generated by CO2. And it's even more interesting to notice that 81% of the CO2 is coming from the production and the consumption of energy. So that's not because we are Schneider Electric, that's because we love simplifying things. We are just saying that at the end of the day, one probably easier way or bit easier way to manage the topic is to say this climate equation is in fact an energy equation. If you crack the energy story, you crack most of the topic. If you look at the source of this CO2 emission, well, you know what? No surprise. That's fossil fuel generation with gas, with oil, with coal. And if you look at the usage, that's buildings, including residential, that you notice is not negligible. That's, of course, all the industrial processes, I'll give you a data point later, and transportation. So that's what we need to crack if we want to accelerate decarbonization, keep track with this 2050 milestone, and hope that we mitigate the plus 2.5 to plus 3.5 temperature rise. So, at Schneider Electric, we believe that where we are today, the fastest route to carbon neutrality is a world more digital and more electric. Let me explain you why in a simple way. More electric first. Electricity is by far the most efficient energy, 3 to 5 times more efficient than others. So if you electrify, you decrease consumption. That's the first point. The second point, which is even more important, is that electricity is the only energy source that can be decarbonized over time. If you electrify, you decrease consumption, but you also prepare yourself for the renewables, for example. More digital is extremely simple. We love to say at Schneider that digital is making invisible visible. And there has been extremely serious studies demonstrating that if I provide you a comprehensive understanding of your consumption, at home, for example, you'll decrease it. Don't ask me why, it's more psychology than engineering, probably, but that's a fact. if we want to build this world more electric and more digital, we need to act on 3 levels. The first one, very obvious, everybody is thinking about it immediately, is decarbonizing the supply. Of course, 45% of the solution. That's probably not the cheapest, bit of capex, if you see what I mean. That's for sure not the fastest. That's depending a lot on public policies everywhere in the world, but that's something that has to be done. Today, 80% of the energy worldwide is still generated by fossil fuel. 60% if I speak only of electricity. That's still a lot. But you know, speaking of supply is not enough. Supply is just chasing demand. So we need to manage the demand side. And the first thing to do on demand side is electrify the usage. 30% of the solution. I was speaking to you about industrial processes. 20%, 22% to be accurate, of the CO2 in the world is generated by EV industry processes using pump, compressor, heaters, boilers, sorry if it's your case in the room, which are not electrified. Half of this could be electrified over the night. You would decrease consumption. If you leverage renewable, you would offset CO2. Half of this, 10% of the CO2 in the world. And of course, last but not least, 25% of the solution, the rest, is about energy efficiency. And here, as you can imagine, in the mature countries, there is an interesting debate about, but how come do they want me to consume less and so on? That's not the topic. 60% of the worldwide energy is wasted, or sometimes even, I know you have this in India, lost. Okay, so here, digital making invisible visible is not about consuming less, it's about consuming better. Make no mistake, what I'm sharing with you is not a vision. It's already happening. It's happening in a very unstructured way. It's very dependent on countries. It's not happening fast enough. You probably know that historically we are coming from a grid, which is a linear story, one direction. You burn fossil fuels at one end, you transport over long distance, you have points of consumption, done. That's the history of the grid, totally passive. Well, the supply side starting getting cleaner. In 2004, 1 gigawatt of solar energy was invested during the year. In 2024, 1 gigawatt of solar energy was invested per day. Today, 30% of the world electricity is generated by solar, wind, hydro, and nuclear. The most surprising thing, and I think we have some Schneider people explaining it in the marketplace, is that suddenly there is a supply side on the demand side. The consumers are becoming producer. We call them prosumer. You know, it's enabled by renewables. It's mainly solar, very often. It's enabled by storage. That's disrupting the whole story because suddenly the grid has to be bidirectional. It has to be flexible. That's a mess. You know, in my country, where the utility is extremely rigid and so on, that's really scary. And of course, last but not least again, digital technologies are used to drive demand optimization. So that's a bit strange because I told you more or less at the same time that we are not fast enough, but it's already happening. So can we accelerate? 90 countries have committed on carbon neutrality. More than 5,000 companies committed on carbon neutrality everywhere in the world. That's cool. The problem we have today is a disconnect, as I was saying at the right beginning, between the commitments and the reality. In 2024, 10% of the Fortune 500 companies, 10% have been reaching one of their 6 sustainability targets. So we are far to be at the right pace. But I have one good news because I cannot come and just depress everybody. The good news is that the technologies to achieve this world more electric and more digital already exist. Not in our industry, but they already exist. So let me share with you to finish what it means. If we look at more electric, bear with me, imagine a future where we decarbonize the supply and we massively electrify the demand. Well, suddenly you will have distributed energy resources with renewable, with storage. You will have power converter popping up everywhere. because you need to support electrification of buildings, of processes. That's moving towards active distribution network, connected or not to the main grid, hybrid in both AC and DC. For our industry, that's a change, a paradigm change. Because today you need to know that the energy management solution in the world, not Schneider Electric, overall, are still massively leveraging electromechanical technologies. Done. The shift towards power electronic and software is starting. If you look at more digital, it has been said by Chirac, by the way, if you imagine a future where the digital technology are used at scale to drive demand optimization, well, sensors everywhere. Data, more data, much more data, okay? Driving AI usage down to the device. Connectivity everywhere, wired, wireless, both. Seamless cybersecurity. Another revolution for our industry. That's calling for much more computing power at the edge, as mentioned by Chirac, because, you know, digital, and I have systematically the question in Europe, digital must be part of the solution, not be one more problem. So we need to take care of the decarbonization of this digital stack. Managing 1 gigaoctane of data at the cloud is costing 1 million more energy than doing it at the edge. So we are speaking of edge computing. We are speaking of virtualization. You know what, at the end of the day, we are going fast towards software-defined architectures. More centralized, or I should say less distributed, because we will keep intelligent device. You know, we are managing something extremely important, which is your safety. So we need to take local decision at device level to make sure that when you are in your kitchen and the breaker needs to trip, he's not asking a data center in Singapore before. Okay? So, software-defined architecture. Oh, you already understood, there is no need for you to do too much effort just after the lunch. You don't need to imagine this future. It's happening as we speak, everywhere. Unstructured, that's the problem today. If you step back, the world has been going towards 4 technology-driven revolutions over the past, let's say, 250 years. Beginning, and by the way, they have been impacting both industry and energy. At the beginning of the 19th century, we have been domesticating electricity. At the beginning of the 20th century, we have been moving towards massive electrification. In the 50s, the development of silicon enabled renewables, solar. And today, we are just witnessing the convergence of electricity and digital. We call it electricity 4.0. I'll put it again because it's nice. That's the future of energy. But please remember one thing. That's the fastest route to carbon neutrality. Thank you.